And then Marcel will be followed by Josh Kraft, who many of you know from Utah Clean Energy, who has several updates for us. And then Nick Hsu from Western Resource Advocates has also joined us today. So this is the agenda and our format. Tim's going to kick us off to give us an overview on how to engage with the legislature, and we're going to take you to the very good Utah Legislature website to show you how easy it is to navigate and find bills or your legislature. And then Tim is going to take us into an overview of what's happening with the Great Salt Lake and the bills that are pertinent to the lake this season. He'll be followed by Marcel, who will be talking a little bit more about what the trust and Audubon Nature Conservancy are doing to preserve the lake. And then we're going to move on beyond the lake, and Josh will do a review on what's happening with some bills relating to rooftop solar, truck and energy efficiency. And then Nick will follow up with medium and heavy truck electrification and the beehive reduction plan. If you have questions during their delivery, we have quite a bit of content to go through. So if you can just put your questions in the queue in the chat, and then at the end of it, we'll be able to go back after everyone's presented and direct the questions. And please state if you want to direct your question to an individual speaker, or you just have a general question that you feel someone on the panel here will be able to help with. All right, so with that, we are going to start with Tim on our tips and tricks on how to best engage with the legislature. Tim?
Thanks, Tracy. I tried to trip you up with a little tongue twister right out of the box. Good afternoon, everybody. It's great to be with you. I engage on Great Salt Lake in a wide variety of issues and sort of water law and policy generally, but the two hats I currently wear, again, with the brine shrimp cooperative, which sort of takes me all over the world, because brine shrimp from the Great Salt Lake get exported to 55 different countries. I also serve as a senior advisor to the College of Science at the University of Utah, which is kind of a fun little side gig. Go ahead and advance it, Tracy. So, there's the secret sauce, and because this is the great state of Utah, we have to have the secret fry sauce. So I'm going to give you the secret recipe for fry sauce because Utah invented it. Not really. Talk to a Belgian about that if you want to get them really animated. Just say that Utah invented fry sauce. But in all seriously, if I boil down, before I was served in the legislature, I served for about 8 years. I worked for 8 years as an advocate in the legislature, as a lobbyist, if you will, for an NGO, for a nonprofit on conservation issues. And so I have a lot of experience in this space. And these three, as I sort of say, what do I think are the three most valuable things if you want to engage with the legislature and actually have an influence? What are the three most valuable things that a person could do? And the first one is to learn the process. Go ahead, Tracy. The second one is to use the website. The Utah legislature has a very powerful website. And last but not least, you've got to think like a power broker, which is a little bit of code words for just learning to sort of see things from the legislator's perspective. If you can do that, then you're much more likely to be able to shape their thinking and ultimately how they act. If you can sort of think from their perspective. So Tracy, there's a billion of these, and you can just go ahead and advance them through to number 10. But if those of you I won't ask for a show of hands who's old enough to remember Schoolhouse Rock and I'm Just a Bill sitting here up on Capitol Hill. But it actually is like awesome for teaching people the legislative process. And mostly what I wanted to illustrate with this slide is that there are at least 10 distinct actions that have to happen before a bill becomes law in the Utah legislature. I will say, and this is kind of, I won't do a Q&A because it's a little bit hard. I do like to do interactive a little bit, but if I asked you which of these is the most important, we might get various answers. But the reality is the single biggest hurdle for a piece of legislation in the Utah legislature is getting drafted in the first instance. So we have a bottleneck here at the legislature, a 45-day slam session, about 33 work days. And so it really creates, it's very difficult to get staff time to get things drafted, and it's hard to get bills in. And so legislators and people that are working outside the session and teeing up legislation well in advance of the session are in kind of pole position, because that first hurdle is the biggest one. But my point is that you can shape the process at each one of these different phases. And if you understand the process, then you're better able to sort of shape it and know how it moves. And then Tracy, go ahead and do the one last click. And they just point out that a big part of what the legislature does is appropriations, which is appropriate money, to allocate public money. And it has its own set of rules. And I hate to say it this bluntly, but it's a very undemocratic process. Very much shaped by the most influential people in the legislature play an outsized role in how money is appropriated. And so it's a whole different ball of wax. People that really master the appropriations process, particularly on the inside, legislators that master that appropriation process have really outsized influence. It's a much simpler process. It doesn't have these 10 different steps, but it's fraught with politics at every turn. So I just wanted to point that out. Go ahead, Tracy, and move to the next one. So I did want to just point out that the Utah legislature's website is won awards, and it's won awards for good reason. It is quite transparent. You can get to a lot of good information really, really fast. When I was a legislator, I used the website, I mean, as a sitting legislator. When I was chair of the House Rules Committee, which means it was my job to track every piece of legislation and help shape where and when it moves, all that kind of stuff, I still probably during the session would use the legislative website at least a dozen times a day, sometimes 2 or 3 times that, because it's just so quick to get to the information that I wanted and needed. Even though I had backdoor tools that could have given me the same information, none of them were as user-friendly as this one. So Tracy, I think we're going to run just to show people, if you log into le.utah.gov, and there's a lot you can do here. So right up, it just pops this beautiful little query engine or search box. And so Tracy, go ahead and type Snyder. If my representative was Casey Snyder, he's a good friend of mine that's still in the legislature, pops up, click on Casey, that little box right around him. So if we click on Casey, a bunch of interesting things will pop up. Notice his phone is on there. And in some legislators' cases, that is their actual cell phone. Right? And you'll see his address, and then you'll see his email address. That is his legislative email address. You can actually click on that link and send the email right out of that box, right? So pretty powerful. And then, if you go down, there's a little bit of bio. You can see how he's in there and everything else. But the really interesting box, and Tracy just hit it, view sponsored legislation. So if I click on sponsored legislation, I pull up, here's the 2 bills that he has that at least he said, these are the names of the bills I'm going to run. And then you can see he's co-sponsoring these 2 Senate bills. Tracy, if you click on, notice these are hyperlinks. So if you click on SB 18, for example, boom, it pops up. And now here we've got a bill. And if you look across the top here, if you could just scroll down or up just a little bit, you notice it's got bill text, and then it's got status, and then it's got hearings and debate. Now we'll take you in just a second. So why don't we go there, Tracy?
Under status?
Go back to the opening web page and just type Great Salt Lake in parentheses into the query box. So put quotes and then say Great Salt Lake. Now, the reason you put quotation marks, for those of you that aren't familiar with a lot of searching, is then it's only going to look for Great Salt Lake versus looking for Great and Salt and Lake, right? So if you do that, you'll notice the first thing that pops up is a Representative Snyder bill from last session. Go ahead and click that, Tracy. I mean, you'd have to scroll down. There's a whole bunch of different stuff. Now, this is a bill from last session. So now we can really see the status, and go ahead and click on that status link. Boom. Okay, so if you look down this, you can see actions and dates. So when was it introduced? When did it go to the Rules Committee? When was it assigned out? Tracy, do you see if you And so if you look on the far right, you can actually see the votes. And so go ahead and click on that committee one, like that 1301. See that 1301? Go ahead and click on that. So I can actually see who voted yes and who voted no, which is kind of interesting on the bill. And then if you go back just one click, Tracy, and then if you go hearings and debate, I can actually listen to the committee debates on the bill. You can fast forward if you're trying to get to something specific. You can move it forward and back. Sometimes it's video. In many cases, it's just the audio. You can see and watch the floor debates, which is why they always tell you to be careful as a legislature not to, pick your nose or something, because it's recorded for time and all eternity, and people can look it up years later. But it's a pretty powerful tool. On that, under that bill text tab, I can see its fiscal note, which is how much money it's going to cost the state, and an analysis of that. I can track amendments and see them. And then the only other thing that I'd say, and you can get to it from any screen, is I think it's under the bills tab. I think it's there. I think go ahead and click that. Let's see. You can sign up for a bill tracking service. What's cool about it, see that tracking service in that middle column? It was that little drop-down menu that was just there. So you see in that middle column, the middle option is tracking service. You have to sign up for it. You have to log into this. But if I had a bill that I cared about, I can plug it into this query engine, and anytime something changes, then I get a notification by email that the bill's been assigned to committee. If I really care about it, now I know I can start to work the committee and that kind of stuff. Okay. All right. Anyway, that's just a taste, but I just wanted to give you a taste of how powerful this tool is. That was perfect, Tracy. Thank you. So go ahead and hit so master the website process was number 1, website was number 2, number 3 is Think Like Power Broker. I don't know that Don Corleone is kind of the best person to use for this, but it is apt in some way. The point is simply this: if you really want to influence a legislator or the legislature as a whole, you need to understand where they're coming from, speak their language, understand what motivates them, and maybe what doesn't motivate them or motivates them in a negative way. And if you can do this, it'll really separate you as an individual, as a public advocate, or as a lobbyist. So go ahead and hit that first bullet, Tracy. It's really important for people, particularly for people that are really concerned about the environment, tend to be left of center. But look, listen, I'm a 8-year veteran of the Utah legislature, conservative Republican. I've spent almost my whole career in natural resource conservation and in the environment. But people that care about environmental issues tend to be left of center. It's important to realize if you fit that bill and you're engaging with this legislature, you are engaging with people that may see environmental or other issues in a radically different way. You just need to understand that. If you want to get something through this legislature, it either has to be sponsored by a Republican, or it has to have the blessings of Republicans, because they control everything. And so the Democrats that can get bills passed have to work with the Republicans to get them through. The same holds true. And so what people tend to want to do is to go to a legislator who shares their ideological bent and ask them to sponsor a bill. But if that legislator if they're in the minority and they have no clout, you've already doomed your bill probably before, or your idea before it's even before it's even gotten going. So it's just important to realize this is a reality of the legislature in Utah, and you can complain about it. People could write these things and they'll talk about how horrible, you are as a legislator. It does nothing to change the political realities here in the state. So next bullet. So realize who you're talking to. Know your audience, right? It's like the first rule of communications is know your audience and be respectful. Just what I was saying. I can't tell you how many times you get an email from somebody and they just light you up. They question your motives. They just, like, some of the harshest. I mean, we'd share them sometimes. They were so funny but they're really harsh and hateful speech and things like that. But just ask yourself, it make somebody who's typing that feel good, but what's the legislative response? It's either ignore immediately, I know where this is, I don't even need to read further, or it tends to make the legislator do what? Move in the opposite direction, right? In the opposite direction. Whatever this person is for, I'm against. So it's just really important to maintain that respectful tone, even if you're upset with something a legislator has said or done. Next bullet. Personalize it. I can't tell you form letters. I just, my interns, and we just have these one little college intern that help us during the session. They were instructed if it was not personalized, nuke it. I just don't want to know. In other words, if somebody couldn't bother to say, Dear Representative Hawks, it just said, Dear Representative, I don't want it. I get so much junk mail. I mean, so much form letters and all that crap. You no time to manage that, right? You get hundreds of emails a day. What is the legislator concerned about? They're concerned about communications on bills that are important to them and communications from their constituents. All the form letters and crap, they just really don't care about. I mean, they kind of care roughly about volume. Oh, I got 1,000 emails on one issue, but they're not going to sit and read those form letters. And so my intern would actually, I just say, nuke them. Let me know if I'm getting a bunch of them. That was about what I'd tell them. Okay, so the other thing to think about, and it's just so important, is understand that legislators, these are professionals that are doing this quote unquote part-time job for which they're paid, vast sums of money in what was supposed to be sort of their free time. And the reality is they don't have a ton of time. The legislature is this incredible crucible of 45 days. And so you just got to understand their time is at an absolute premium. If you send them a one-page thing to read, they're not going to read it. They just won't. They don't have the time, unless it's your best friend who's also in the legislature. But just understand that they really have crazy demands on their time. And so, I would do things like this. If I really wanted to talk to a legislator, you could always show up to committee meeting and try to catch them as they're leaving, because they have to walk from point to point. Just say, can I walk with you? And many legislators will say yes, if they don't have somebody else walking with them already. And there you've got them for 5 minutes and you can actually have a conversation with them. Before committee meetings start is another good time. And you can approach the dais before that's been the meeting's been called into session, and you can just have a conversation with a legislator, kind of talk to you for just a minute. And a lot of times legislators will let you do that. But dovetailing in ways that aren't competing for their scarce time is a great way to do it, right? You can always go through their interns and try to get on their schedule, but that's a hard way to go about it. Okay. And I think there's one more bullet, isn't there, Tracy?
Just respect. Oh, there you go.
Yeah. And the last one is just, so here's the funny thing. If I asked folks, if I just surveyed people, even people that engage in the legislature, and I said, what is the single most important thing you could do? Where could you have the most influence in the process? I bet most of them would think that the most important thing I can do is show up to committee and offer testimony. And guess what? It's probably the single least important thing you can do is to show up and to testify. You feel great, right? You're sitting at the podium and there's this half circle of legislators, and you get to speak your piece, by golly. And guess what? Almost none of those legislators are even listening to you because they're on their phones, not just surfing the web, but they're getting ready for the next committee hearing. They're talking to other legislators. They're doing all this stuff. They're not really paying attention to that committee testimony. And here's the other inconvenient truth. In many cases, they've already made up their mind on that bill. So they've studied the bill in advance before they got to committee hearing, decided what they're going to do. And so all of these people testifying for and against in many cases, don't make a lick of difference. There are rare exceptions. There's some really powerful testimony that comes through, but it is the exception rather than the rule. So I would strongly encourage you to get to legislators before hearings, and not think that 30 seconds or that 1 minute that they give you is really going to do much to shape the outcome. Don't get up just to say what somebody's already said. It's going to make no difference at all. It's just going to make the legislators mildly irritated. Okay, so there you go. There's the secret sauce.
So
yeah,
then,
Tracy.
Listening to your advice here, if we're for our audience today, if they're seeing a bill that one of the speakers is presenting, and it's something that they want to engage in, they should start looking up who the players are and the sponsors of the bill, where their representative stands, and start reaching out now.
That's right. If you already see it, now's the time, because they'll have more time this week than they will next, and then it gets progressively worse as the session goes on. Mm-hmm. Always the sooner the better to try to influence people when it comes to legislation, positive or negative. The sooner you can get in there, the better.
And the other piece of advice I've received from other representatives is they really like to see at the beginning of your email to them, or even in your subject line, I am a constituent.
Yes, if you are in fact a constituent, right out of the box, it should be the very first thing you say. I used to tell my constituents, put it in the subject line, constituent, colon, then whatever you want to say. Because again, that's who keeps them elected. That's who got them elected in the first place. And so that the constituent has a hyper privileged position with a legislator. Josh, you had something. Do you have something to add?
Just very quickly, I would just say for folks, Tim, and you can correct this or modify this, but on a particular issue, finding out who the chair and the vice chair of the committee are and getting to them tends to be pretty important, and communicating with them prior to a hearing. And I will say that even though testimony tends not to make a difference, I think it's good to be aware that that's when legislators who may not have been involved previously tend to start paying attention. And so it's just good to be aware of hearing timing and then who the chairs are. But your communication with your legislator is by far the most important, if you're going to influence a bill. And then I would say secondarily, the chair of that committee, to know where they stand is a pretty important place to be, even if your individual comment tends to be not particularly the biggest, that's not the biggest impact that you're going to have.
Yeah, I think that the committee chair thing is pretty important. Just realize committee chair determines when bills in that committee are heard and in what order. And so if it's a bill they care about, they'll put it early in an agenda. Typically, if it's one that they don't care about, they'll put it late. Sometimes they'll put it late because they know that it will be rocket docket late. So it'll get really the legislature, the committee will get impatient and want to move it quickly. So there's all kind of strategy that goes into when bills are heard. Committee chairs, and to a much lesser extent, vice chairs shape how that works. So it's just that's a good illustration from Josh about how to understand that process. If you understand that process, you have more opportunities to shape it.
All right, so we're going to move on now in the next 35 minutes and let everyone know these impending bills that you might have an interest in. And if you are interested, you can read further from what we showed you on the website and begin to engage with the political leaders responsible for that bill. All right, Tim, here we go.
Okay, and we're going to move through this pretty quickly because there's not a ton of legislation that's explicit for Great Salt Lake. And again, I'm just looking at Great Salt Lake. There are other water issues that are broader, and we'll talk about some that are maybe hybrid. But I think the important thing to realize about Great Salt Lake is that there's been an enormous amount of policy work done between 2020 and 2023 on Great Salt Lake. At least a dozen pieces of legislation, many of them significant, once in a generation type changes, authorizing water banking, split season leasing, like a whole host of things, establishing the Great Salt Lake Commissioner's Office, the Great Salt Lake Trust. So we're really in what I would call more of an implementation phase. And so people say, well, where's the 12 bills? Don't people prioritize the Great Salt Lake? It's like, well, actually, we're in implementation phase for a lot of this stuff. And so mostly what we're going to see is refinements on existing policy. And go ahead and advance the slide, Tracy. I think the most important of those bills, and it's sponsored by Senator Scott Sandell, is Senate Bill 18. This is an update on a piece of legislation that he ran last year, and it deals with saved water in the agricultural space. So when the state or the federal government, when we fund efficiencies in the agricultural sector, there's a block of water savings that's generated from that. And the question becomes, well, what can you do with that savings? The law right now places very serious restrictions on it. This bill sort of clarifies, hey, number one, the law is going to recognize that conserved water, that saved water that was funded, say, through Great Salt Lake Trust or something else, and then allow that water to be moved somewhere else, most particularly to the Great Salt Lake. And so if we're serious about saving the lake, we have to find ways to make sure that public investments translate into actual wet water in the lake. This bill is really important in that effort. I think that's it, Tracy. I know there's more bullets there, but that's in essence what this bill does. Very important bill. A lot of people in the water community have been working on this. So Representative Ray Ward.
Oh, yeah. Sorry about that. Just wanted to say when one of the hurdles that we had in preserving or getting water to the lake was the use it or lose it in water right in agriculture. So the bill that you just mentioned addressed that.
Yes, and that was already addressed previously, but this is more particularly what water can be quantified, what water can be moved. So it gets down a little more brass tacks where the rubber meets the road, but a very important piece of legislation for the future of the lake, and quite frankly, for environmental uses of water as a whole. The second bill is quite interesting, and this is Representative Ray Ward. He doesn't typically engage on Great Salt Lake issues, but he's a very bright, very smart legislator. He's a physician, and so he's thinking about things all the time. And he said, well, God, we've made all these big investments. Look at it, agricultural water optimization, $250 million the state invested, water banking, huge bill that I was a part of, watershed enhancement trust that Marcel really spearheads, $40 million or $50 million to sort of that effort. I think it was 40 total. Anyway, secondary metering, another $250 million the state invested in those efforts. And what Representative Ward said is, well, what has that done for the lake? And Great Salt Lake Commissioner, you ought to tell us what's been done. So I think this is being worked out, but the broad concept is a reporting back. And I think some of this stuff's encouraging. What the trust is doing is encouraging. Other the stuff's a little discouraging because we can't draw a line between the money invested in secondary metering, for example, or in ag optimization, and show a measurable benefit in Great Salt Lake. Why? Well, we're still working all the mechanics of these kind of projects out. But this is just kind of a report back thing that is focused on Great Salt Lake, and it's probably helpful just to sort of say, hey, how are these programs working? What's the future of them? Okay, next one, Tracy. Mike Schultz has a bill, and he's the Speaker of the House, and they almost never run bills. So kind of interesting. And he hasn't released the bill. It's just a title, and the title says Great Salt Lake Mineral Extraction Amendment. And so I sort of posed the question, why would he release just the title of the bill? Why would he sponsor it as a speaker? It's the message. So it's a throwing down of the gauntlet in a sense to say to people that are interested in mineral extraction, I'm coming with something. And that's what this bill is. Very likely it's a follow-up to a major piece of legislation that Representative Snyder ran last year regarding mineral extraction, royalties, what happens in times of scarcity, how much control does the state have, how does it work with mineral extraction industries? When water is really scarce or it hits low levels, how can we make sure that the mineral companies won't just keep extracting more and more and more water? It's that kind of vein, but we don't know what's in it. We'll have to wait and see when that text drops. Okay, I think next one, Tracy. Representative Doug Owens has a couple of interesting bills I'll just hit on lightly, but he's been a great advocate of the lake, Doug Owens. If you don't know him, he's a terrific guy. But the first one sort of says for schools and certain state buildings that are in the watershed of the Great Salt Lake, if you're doing new construction or a major renovation, it puts restrictions on how much turf you can use. It has to be functional turf. In other words, turf that we use for something other than just mowing, right? So really applaud that effort because he's trying to identify there's a ton of water waste out there that's just turf that we don't use. And he's really going after that. The other one he's looking at is what we call shoulder season watering. This is when people start watering their lawns earlier in the spring when you really don't need to be watering, or late in the fall when the lawn's already starting to go dormant. He's trying to cut back on that water use so we can leave that water in natural systems. Okay, next one, Tracy. And let me just mention just a few really quickly. These are bills that don't directly mention Great Salt Lake, but may have implications. Representative Snyder is running one on water infrastructure funding. And just so you know, like even if the state doesn't build new infrastructure, which is things like dams that give me real heartburn, but just maintaining what's already there, we're talking like $17 to $20 billion of need. And so Representative Snyder is trying to centralize and rationalize the process by which water infrastructure projects are identified, prioritized, and funded much the way we already do with roads. Representative Bennion has one on riparian areas, riparian zones, and floodplains, basically trying to get local governments to include riparian protection as part, or at least acknowledging riparian protection as part of their general plans. Next one. Representative Ballard is big on the issue of sort of measuring water, and I think she wants sort of watering of public spaces like schools, so I'm reporting back on that. Next one. And Carl Albrecht has one that's really part of a broader effort. You can't manage what you can't measure. And one of the things the state really needs is better measurement, telemetry, and other things. And so this bill from Representative Albrecht attempts to move forward, enhance our ability to measure water and to account for it. And that's it. That's my piece. I think, are we going to do business council now, or we do it later, Tracy?
Yeah, I'm gonna come back to this just on a shortage for a time to make sure we can get these other speakers in, and then we can, this is a good one though, I want to come back to it.
Okay.
All right, and then next up we have Marcel Shoup, and now this is another professional who actually lives and breathes the Great Salt Lake and its watershed. And Marcel is with the National Audubon Society and is working on a lot on the watershed that's coming into the Great Salt Lake and protecting it. And she's going to give us an update briefly on the latest in enhancing that watershed. Marcel?
Thanks, Tracy, and good to see everyone. Really appreciate it. I'm thinking maybe Tracy, I shouldn't have taken out those last 3 slides, but I'll at least hopefully give more space for everyone. So as Tim mentioned, most of a lot of the heavy lift on some of the policy has been over 2020 to 2023. And so that's where I wanted to focus on just a few of those areas. So Tracy, if you would just go to the next page. So, when the Water Trust was first started, I think there were a lot of people thought, oh yeah, good, $40 million, that's going to take care of the lake. I think we all need to make it very clear that, in order to preserve Great Salt Lake and the wetlands, it is going to take as many tools and resources as we can come up with in the human imagination as well as the human will. And so even though I won't talk about all of these, I think it's helpful to see how some key pieces fit together. And I'm mostly going to focus on the Great Salt Lake Commissioner, the Integrated Basin Study for Great Salt Lake Watershed, and the Great Salt Lake Watershed Enhancement Trust. Certainly, other activities around water conservation for both municipal and industrial and ag are important to the activities of preserving water that might benefit Great Salt Lake. There is a host of work being done around water management and distribution infrastructure, as well as measuring and measuring water flows, particularly when we're talking about Great Salt Lake. And then we have tools like in-stream flow and water banking to help do water transactions for Great Salt Lake. So with that, let me focus in on the Great Salt Lake Commissioner. This was put into law last session. And this sets up an Office of the Great Salt Lake Commissioner. Brian Steed has been appointed as the commissioner, and Tim Davis, the deputy commissioner. And the act is really focused on getting a office, the commissioner's office, to really coordinate all the activity among so many agencies and interests in the lake. I mean, if you looked at the number of agencies just on the state level that intersect with the lake, it's probably well over 20, if not more. And then you have a number of nonprofits, businesses, and a number of federal agencies as well. Part of that factors into a strategic plan that the commissioner will be issuing, I believe, on the 16th. And I think that's going to be really important because I think it's going to help provide some of the glue to bring a number of these pieces together, and also provide more resources and support for moving forward with many issues. And we just came, Tim and I just came from a Great Salt Lake Advisory Council meeting where Commissioner Steed gave a presentation with sort of a sneak preview for the strategic plan. And certainly, in addition to coordinating, I think, as we all know, a big focus is trying to get water to the lake. So there will be components of the strategy focused on agricultural water optimization and piloting programs around that, putting more effort into some of that. as well as continuing to support the work that's being done to do water conservation around the lake, as well as trying to look at how do we balance all the water uses in the Great Salt Lake watershed. And in the meantime, try to protect air quality and address the salinity challenges facing the lake. That, I would just say, if you want to get that sneak preview, it looks to me, I put a link down in the bottom there, the YouTube link. The Great Salt Lake Advisory Council has already posted their meeting from today, and you can watch that if you're interested. The commissioner has some pretty interesting authority, and that really is if state agencies decide they're going to go a different direction than the strategy, there is the potential to try to bring back an alignment. I don't think that's going to be needed. I hope it won't be needed. It's really more about really trying to encourage and get folks on the same page. And I can tell you from what I've already seen, I've been greatly pleased at how well some of this is already starting to shape up. So also in the bottom, I've put a link to the state's website that's sort of the holding place for everything Great Salt Lake, but there's lots of other components of the Division of Natural Resources website that have Great Salt Lake information, but that's where you'll find the commissioner's webpage. So part of the kind of connection that the commissioner has is also with, if you want to switch sides, the Great Salt Lake Basin Integrated Plan. This is an effort that came out of two pieces of work. The Bureau of Reclamation does these basin-wide studies in the West. They did one in Colorado River some years ago, and they have had an interest in Great Salt Lake watershed. The state was working with them to try to get a grant to do a basin study. And that came together about the same time that the legislature passed HB 429 in 2022. That provided $5 million to undertake this integrated watershed assessment. They have to finish it by November of 2026. It is a behemoth piece of work, and hopefully some of it will be phased. The work plan for this effort has been in the public. It was comment period on it closed this Monday, but you can go look at it at these websites here below. And I would say that while there are a number of the effort that they went through to do a gap assessment and determine what is really needed is pretty amazing how much stuff is going on in Great Salt Lake, and they have a number of work plans where their priorities will be focused. But from my perspective, the biggest priority is one that's mandated by the act, which is to get a water budget for Great Salt Lake under different scenarios. So if we're talking about the impacts of climate change and a really, really severe water level, then what we need is to understand what that means for Great Salt Lake in terms of the water flows and how that can be managed such that we don't have the same situation we had nearly last year when salinity levels grew to very detrimental levels as water levels declined. So I would say this is a really technical piece of work. It's really important. And will actually help feed into the commissioner's work as well as work from the Great Salt Lake Watershed Enhancement Trust. So go ahead. I think many of you have heard about the Great Salt Lake Watershed Enhancement Trust or Great Salt Lake Water Trust, whatever you want to call it. It stems from what was HB 410 in 2022. It set up a program and provided $40 million to establish and implement a water trust. And really the primary focus for the trust is on benefiting Great Salt Lake, the wetlands, and hydrologic connections there. There is a statutory advisory council, but the trust is not a policymaking or governmental entity, despite all the government connections we have. The oversight is by the Utah Division of Forestry, Fire, and State Lands. This was issued as a grant, and National Audubon Society and the Nature Conservancy partnered and submitted a grant application and were awarded the grant in June of 2022. The agreements to get that up and running were finalized in January of last year. And so we've been up and running for a little more than a year. And the slides I took out, but I'll tell you really quickly, is to say that at this time, what we're reporting, and we will be coming out with a report at the end of January, is that we've at least transacted, we have water transactions for approximately 64,000 acre feet. Some of those transactions were, one in particular was approved late last year, but not in time for the water to get to the lake, so we were unable to deliver that water. So not all of that 64,000 acre feet will necessarily be water delivered to the lake, but it is the face value of the water rights involved. The trust also went and opened up a grant opportunity for wetlands, for projects to restore or protect wetlands around Great Salt Lake. And I would point you to our website. There's a wetlands page. You can go look at a map where these are located, but this, the grant opportunity opened in July. In November, through the Trust Advisory Council, 8 projects were awarded $8.5 million. The match on those projects is about $6.5 million, with a focus on restoring or improving water supply or habitat for a little more than 13,000 acres. The trust is also...
Oh, go ahead, Marcella.
Okay, I'll just say really quickly, this month is the month of strategic plans. So the trust will be coming out with its strategic plan probably the week following the commissioner's plan, which I think is scheduled for the 16th. So that is a really quick update of all the pieces moving forward. The trust is continuing to work on a number of water transactions. And I will just say, I think sometimes I hear that there's, things don't happen fast enough, but I will, being in the weeds, I have to say there are lots of parties and people that have to come to a meeting of minds, a lot of approvals to work out. And so the water transactions themselves do take quite a bit of time. And then I would also say, because I think I saw Jenica on the call, that the 64,000 acre feet, some 20,000 of that is related to the donation made by the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. And we worked with the state Forestry, Fire, and State Lands Agency, as well as the church, in helping to facilitate that transaction.
Marcel and Tim, thank you so much for a very good overview of what's happening with the Great Salt Lake. And thank you also for everything that you're doing to preserve such an incredible resource to the state and the region.
Thank you.
And now next we have Josh Kraft from Utah Clean Energy, who's going to take us through, we're shifting away from the lake now and going more into rooftop solar, some energy efficiency measures, and then also on transportation and trucking. Josh?
Great. Thank you to all of you, and thank you to the Utah Sustainable Business Coalition for inviting us to join. I'm going to try to go through this pretty quickly, but I would be remiss if I wasn't going to provide just a little bit of context about energy and to some extent air quality this session. The exciting thing for us at Utah Clean Energy is there's a lot of momentum in the world, particularly in the electricity front and the adoption of electric vehicles. And I want to thank all of you. The demand from customers and interest in cleaner forms of electricity and air quality is really important to how our state and our nation discusses these issues. And you will continue to have a major and important voice in shaping those discussions. Outside of the legislature, many of you be aware there are some new federal tax incentives in addition to grants that as a result of action by Congress over the last 2 years. I'm not going to spend time talking about those today, but I do think if you have questions, we want to be a resource to you, and it's an incredibly powerful way if you have a project that you're working on, or are they at your own facility or at your home. There tends to be a lot of money, and as a tax credit, it may not require action by a governmental entity. And so through a grant or an application, it's kind of, you can work with your accountants to make that action happen on your own. I want to say that energy is, I think, going to be a hotter topic than it has been in the past this year. And I think in partly because of we're seeing some important and exciting momentum on adoption of clean energy resources. I think there's also fear and concerns about energy prices, and some concern about national policy. Some of this I understand, but some of this I want to say I think is a little bit overblown. And I think this is going to play in this session, and I can answer some questions about that. But I wanted to say there's going to be some good things that happen, some not so good things that happen this session. Energy is wonky, and we want to be a resource to you. So please stay in touch, and I'll try to do the same. I'm going to talk about some of the bills that we're actively working on and following now. And so Tracy, go to the next slide. Outside of the utility sector, we at Utah Clean Energy feel like there is ample room for growth for more rooftop solar resources, particularly in the residential sector. The residential rooftop solar is not going to displace the need for cleaner resources on utility scale, but it can be a really important way to self-generate closer to load as we're seeing population growth and we're seeing more electrification of our vehicles and our homes and buildings, which is a good thing. This is a way to help meet and take up some of that slack closer to home, and help reduce the need for more utility scale resources or large scale resources by meeting that through rooftop solar. In that sense, it's also an important component of a more resilient and reliable grid. We're seeing challenges with our electricity grid because of wildfires, extreme temperatures, to some extent drought, thinking about our hydropower resources. And it makes all the sense in the world to us to have rooftop solar continue to grow. And it has stalled a little bit, particularly in the residential space, as a result of some changes in what rooftop solar folks are compensated for. And the long story, the short version of this is that right now rooftop solar exports from rooftop into the electricity grid get about half of the retail rate, about 5 cents for what you send back versus 10 cents for what you pay in. The other important change that's happened as a result of recent regulatory changes is that the rate, even that rate, changes from year to year. It is not stable. And so it's hard to estimate your payback period for what you can get for rooftop solar. So even if you're you reduce a lot, it's hard to get to know what the payback's going to be, what you're going to get for installing a system when you export into the grid. We're working with Senator Wayne Harper to have a bill that that is not yet public, but is very much in the works, that would modify the export credit rate. That is, again, what you send from your home into the grid, to have it be a floor, a sort of a set percentage versus the retail rate. So there's stability and slightly higher compensation than the 5 cents that you get today. I want to say that your voice is really important here. We're expecting a lot of pushback from Rocky Mountain Power and some other utilities. We don't see this as a threat, again, to our basic or major utility, but this is a particularly good opportunity for us to think about distributed solar, rooftop solar, and having a higher compensation so we can maximize the use of that resource. So look out for that. We're going to be working on that this session and would love your support. Next bill.
Oops, I think
it's okay. I'll say why don't we skip that, Tracy, for the moment? I think it's less important. I do want to mention very briefly that there's some bills that we're concerned with. I'm sorry to Representative Colin Jack, I'm picking on him a little bit, but there's certainly some bills that, it's particularly HB 191. It's a new bill that would, in our view, put the legislature in an inappropriate position to slow the retirement of some uneconomic resources, and not maybe the right way to do it. So one I want to flag for you all, it's kind of against market principles. It's against, I think, a good transition to some of our older and retiring generating facilities. And so it's one we want to watch. HB 117 by Representative Jefferson Burton, I think is just one piece that we're keeping an eye on. It would put some fairly onerous requirements on wind energy facilities in the state, having that we think are unnecessary. There may not be a ton of wind development, but it's one where we want to certainly work with our legislature to allow for easier permitting and development of clean energy resources where it makes sense, not putting up more barriers and obstacles. Next slide. The last thing, I just wanted to flag a few more bills that, and I'll answer some of the questions in the chat when I turn things over to Nick. I think there's going to be some push on energy storage, tax credits, and incentives that we're going to be supporting and watching out for. Senator Nate Bluin, who is a representative from Salt Lake, a Democrat, has flagged some bills on geothermal energy. Enhanced geothermal is something that we think can get bipartisan support and is the kind of stable, clean resource that we can develop in Utah. There's a lot of great geothermal potential, so something to watch out for there. And then finally, I put a question mark. I think that Representative Tyler Clancy of the Provo area is planning to run something that would have state agencies either evaluate or set emissions reduction goals. And I don't know the prospects for moving that this year, but certainly as we think, many of you know about the Winter Olympic and Paralympic bid, we think that thinking about how that opportunity, but also the expectation from the International Olympic Committee that air quality and certainly water quality and climate are going to be part of that bid, we should be evaluating public policy that can support that. And again, it's been exciting to see that move, and the business voice is going to be really important in that sector. Sorry to run through that quickly, but I wanted to leave Nick some time. We do have a legislative tracker, which will be up on our website shortly. We also have a Wednesday Clean Energy Business Coalition call at 12:30 for members. And if you're interested in becoming a member of our CEBC, I'd welcome that. I'll leave my contact information in the chat. Thanks, Tracy.
Thank you, Josh. And thanks for all that Utah Clean Energy does to lead us into the future. Appreciate it. Okay, and then next up we have, whoops, going too fast here. Way fast. Nick Hsu from Western Resource Advocates is going to walk us through. There we go.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Nick Scow here with Western Resource Advocates. With less than 5 minutes, I won't be able to do this justice, but you can go to that first slide, Tracy. Just to make sure we're all on the same page, there's a bill targeting electrification of medium heavy-duty vehicles we've been working on with Senator Don Ipsen. This is Class 2B through 8 vehicles, so you're talking everything from large full-size pickup trucks, box trucks, school buses, all the way to long-haul trucking. Next slide. So why medium heavy-duty vehicle electrification? So you wouldn't guess this, but a lot of the big diesel vehicles on our roads, something like 6 or 7%, the vehicles on our roads are emitting over 50% of certain pollutants like NOx. And the state has very bad air quality problems beyond the particulate pollution that you all experienced over the holiday break. Our ozone pollution problem is getting worse, and this year we will be bumped up to serious non-attainment with the Clean Air Act by the EPA. So the Division of Air Quality has to take big steps to target these emissions of NOx and VOCs, and are currently working on a state implementation plan to address these. So this is what we're trying to do by helping with this. Major health benefits, according to the American Lung Association, also major economic benefits, and major opportunities to fund this kind of electrification through federal grants in the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law and the Inflation Reduction Act. Next slide. So the big issue, and one of the big barriers with medium and heavy duty vehicle electrification is price parity. These models right now are often, depending on the vehicle type, more expensive than their internal combustion engine counterpart. That's largely due to the fact that the markets have not fully come to maturity and taken off. So these incentives offered through various federal programs, and for this, we're targeting one specifically, can help bring that upfront cost down for fleets, local governments, small businesses, all sorts of entities that might want to have electric vehicles and help us with our air quality problems, particularly in the northern Wasatch Front, which you can see kind of how it works in this graph. Next slide. So anyway, what I should have said on that is we have this bill with Senator Don Ipsen, and I don't have a link to the bill yet to share with you because it's still in ledge research. We're working on this closely with Utah Clean Energy, but people are really excited about it. We think this is a great tool for the state. And while the state has done a lot with charging infrastructure, federal government has tax credits for personal electric vehicles. This is one area nobody has really touched in the state. So if you're interested in signing a sign-on letter in support of this, whether your business might be in support, please give me an email. I think Tracy will share our contact info, or email Josh and we can hook you into this campaign. One thing really quick to mention that isn't legislation, but the Division of Air Quality is currently drafting what they call the Beehive Emission Reduction Plan. This is due to a $3 million planning grant they got from the Inflation Reduction Act. And this is a probably generational opportunity for the state to take advantage of major federal funding to address certain emission sectors in the state. The draft plan will be put out the last week of January. And so I took a screenshot of the website just to show you. If you Google this, or I can put the link in the chat, put your email in there and you'll get updates. But they really do want business input on the plan, this priority action plan that they're drafting. A lot of groups like ours have given them specific policy measures with quantified emissions that they can reduce. But this is a really good opportunity for businesses to weigh in. And this is something that the state will be competing against other states for. So great ideas from business and buy-in would be most welcome. A great opportunity to address our air quality problems and the overall emissions driving climate change in the state of Utah. So there's my 3-minute spiel. I'll stop there, Tracy.
Nick, so sorry that you got pinched there at the end. We had so much great information, and an apology on your last name as well. Okay, so and I made the mistake of not even introducing myself at the beginning of the presentation, but I'm Tracy Harden, and I'm a board member of Utah Sustainable Business Coalition. And my fellow board members are with us today too, Alyssa Sheehan, Devin Patton, and Trish Kenlon. And so Alyssa and Trish, I think you've been monitoring Q&A. We're at the top of the hour. I think the speakers, if you guys have a few more minutes, if you can stay on, and I understand a lot of people have back-to-back calls here, but I'd like to give us a minute to address any of the Q&As that I think are really relevant to the audience. So Alyssa or Trish, do you have anything in the Q&A?
In the Q&A, our panelists have done a great job answering most of the questions that have been asked, actually, just right there. If we want to answer one more from Peter that he just submitted, we've got, how do we get state help to enact emissions testing? If anyone wants to take that one.
Peter, can you be a little more specific? Nice to see you, by the way. Hear you, see you.
Peter, feel free to come off mute, or he has another comment just a little further up in the chat, referring specifically to emissions testing.
Oh, sorry, I missed it.
County.
I haven't heard, and something that'd be worth talking with Peter, with the folks in Summit County about getting on the list.
Okay, thank you. And then one more we've got from Alan, who is tracking building on wetlands next to the lake, Inland Port and West Valley City specifically.
Anyone want to take that one? Marcel?
Tim, I don't know if you want to take this, but I think there are a number of organizations that are engaged in well, dialogue or being concerned about some of the port activities. And so I couldn't say that we're actually super engaged, but having seen some of the areas that we do want to preserve now being part of a development plan, we do have many questions for the inland port authorities. And Tim, I'm not sure if because I don't track it closely, if there's not a master plan for all of the locations that they're thinking about now.
I think there is, Marcel, but I don't have a good, I'm not engaged in that process. I don't know. I mean, I think the port is of concern for the wetlands, right? Because it's at all these different spots that they're building now. So they probably do, but I don't know who's like tracking on a regular basis, like what's slated for development.
There is.
There is a lot of efforts to protect it, which is Marcel's engaged in a lot of those efforts to protect wetlands where we can.
Perfect. Okay, well, as far as questions in the chat, Tracy, I think we've covered all of them then.
All right, so to wrap this up, we have recorded the session and we will be posting it to our website. And then in addition, I'll have a PDF of the slides that that will be available as well. And then there's plenty of other links, and everyone who spoke today has their personal contact if you want to reach out to them. And then lastly, I just want to remind everyone that our next webinar is coming up quickly. It's February 8th at noon, and it is going to be on ESG reporting in CSR with the CSR Hub. So if you stay tuned for that, we'll be sending out more information. And thanks again to Tim, Marcel, Josh, and Nick for your time to be with us and all the information you shared today. We appreciate it.
Thank you all.
Yes, thanks.
Thanks,
For being in
everyone.
touch.
Thanks,
everybody.
Tracy. Thanks, everyone.
Welcome.